Dear daughter, today I'm writing this because there is something I wish someone had told me earlier. Something that may seem subtle, but is deeply destructive. It's about moments that turn reality upside down. I remember an ordinary day during a trivial conversation. He looked into my eyes and said, "You're overreacting." That never happened. The words came out like a light breeze, but the impact felt like a punch to the stomach. Those phrases seemed harmless, but they changed everything. I felt lost, as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. In that moment, I didn't realize that the tiny doubts he had planted were seeds of confusion. Maybe I'm wrong, I thought. Did it really happen that way? And so, in my attempt to find myself, I ended up getting lost. It was then that I realized something alarming. The doubts he sowed were not just memory lapses. They were a pattern. It wasn't love. It was control disguised as concern. Pay attention to the signs. What should you look for? Twisted words. Discrediting your own perception. When you start questioning your sanity because of what someone says, that means you are no longer in control of your own truth. It's time to protect yourself. And what is the boundary? Never let someone make you feel that your reality is invalid. If you find yourself constantly reevaluating your memories, that is not love. That is manipulation. If you remember one thing, remember this. Confusion is a sign. And then, my daughter, after that day, everything began to change. What once was an exchange of opinions now turned into a battleground. Every word that came out of my mouth seemed to be meticulously scrutinized, as if I were always on trial in my own life. The sunlight felt dimmer, and the shadows created distorted shapes on the walls around me. I remembered the first day I met that version of him. He was caring, attentive, and seemed to understand every nuance of my soul. But over time, that affection turned into a trap, skillfully woven to ensnare me. It was a subtle dance of compliments followed by disguised criticisms. "You seem really stressed today. Don't you think you need to slow down?" became a daily mantra. It was in these little things that manipulation hid, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I tried to find a fixed point, an anchor amidst the chaos that settled in, but every time I attempted to reaffirm my reality, there was always a comeback that shoved me back into uncertainty. "You're exaggerating," he would repeat, like a distant echo overshadowed by the subtle pressure of his words. I remember a day when I went to the park alone. The air was fresh, and the smell of damp earth brought forth memories of my childhood runs. I looked at the dreams I had built, at the plans that could still be real. It was there that I realized the fragility of that construction. I needed his approval to be myself, and still, I wasn't really being seen. He had become the sun, and I, the shadow. It was on that day that the idea of control began to crystallize within me. The voices that used to be mine had turned into echoes of someone who didn't exist. I saw myself throwing away pieces of who I was every time I tried to conform to what he wanted. And when doubt began to morph into fear, I realized I was trapped in a vicious cycle. A cycle where questioning my reality had become almost an acceptable norm. What if you always feel like an intruder in your own life? If every decision you make is filtered through someone else's critical gaze? What does that say about who you really are? A deep abyss opens up before us when we allow others to dictate our truth. On that very day in the park, I decided I needed to speak up. I needed to confront him with this new awareness. When I got home, my heart was racing with tension. It felt like I was about to unearth a buried secret. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me with an expression that blended curiosity and disdain. "About what exactly, sweetheart? You always seem so worried." The way he said that reminded me that I was dealing with a master of illusion. It was as if every word was wrapped in cotton candy, smooth and seductive, but carried the poison of deep doubts. The conversation unfolded like a minefield. Each step could be fatal. I laid bare my confusion, my discomfort, and instead of understanding, I was met with a storm of denials. "This doesn't make sense. You're just overreacting." And there I was again, feeling unsteady. His silence was heavy, and the look in the depths of his eyes told me I was wrong, confused. After that conversation, something shifted within me for good. The pain of manipulation turned into anger, an anger at having given away all those years of silence and insecurity. I didn't have to accept his narrative, the narrative that turned my colorful world into shades of gray. So, dear one, remember, when you retreat, when you start to doubt yourself, it's time to turn on the light of awareness. Don't let confusion become your new normal. For every moment of doubt planted, plant one of your own certainties. I am certain about my reality. I am valid. If you can, seek out small victories every day. Speak without apology. Affirm your feelings without fear. And above all, never let anyone make you feel small for being yourself. Love should be a fertile ground for growth, not a space where you reevaluate your own history. If instead, you find yourself constantly questioning whether your memories are valid, whether every emotion needs to be justified, that is not love. That is disguised imprisonment. I hope you never have to write a letter like this, but if one day you feel lost in the chaos, always remember, confusion is a sign, and the first step to rediscovering your truth is to believe in it bravely. Anger has transformed into fuel, and the light of awareness has begun to shine. However, like fireworks in the night, the intensity didn't last. With every step toward my freedom, there was a shadow following me. It was doubt, silent, yet always present, like an echo in a dark tunnel. There were days when confusion would return, whispering in my ears, "You're overreacting." And I felt the impact of those words once again. I remember a dinner where the laughter around me felt so distant. The atmosphere was filled with friends, but inside me was a deep emptiness, a constant restlessness. I looked at the plate in front of me, lost in thought, as he talked about his achievements, his voice flowing like a calm river. It was easy to drown in his words, to forget about myself, but there was something different that day. When he made a joke about me, something stirred inside of me. The laughter of others echoed around us, but I couldn't laugh. The joke was a distorted version of who I was, and there I was, sitting at the table, trapped in a role I didn't choose. After dinner, when we were finally alone, the tension was palpable. He turned to me, asking why I seemed so distant, and that question was like a bucket of cold water. Memories began to flood in, each one more intense than the last. I started to realize that manipulation wasn't just a matter of words. It was a subtle dance of emotions. He used my love as a weapon, making me feel guilty about every little thing. Then, that night, I decided I needed to be firm. No more fear. I looked into his eyes, trying to find the courage I felt flowing from me. "I think we need to talk about how you refer to me. Your words hurt." His expression changed instantly, as if a storm had appeared on the horizon. "But I'm just teasing, love. You know it's all in good fun," he replied, his voice now cold and distant. The way he said that was a punch to my stomach. I knew that this joke concealed a subtle poison. It was as if he was trying to make me believe that I was overly sensitive, fragile, incapable of handling reality. And there lay the key. He never wanted me to see the truth. The truth was that he fed off my fragility. Every word he spoke was an attempt to mold me into his image, to create a version of me that behaved according to his expectations. In that moment, a new idea began to germinate within me. I realized I was not only fighting against manipulation, I was fighting for my own identity. It started to become clear that I had allowed him to define who I was for far too long. He had become a distorted mirror, reflecting an image that didn't correspond to my essence. In the days that followed, I felt the urgency to reclaim my own voice. I sought out old passions, those I had abandoned. I started writing again, without worrying about what he would think. The pages of my journal became a sacred space where I could explore my feelings without censorship. Words that had been hidden came to the surface, dancing freely on the paper. One of those nights, while writing under the soft glow of a candle, I realized that confusion was just the starting point. It had no power over me. I could choose how to respond to her. Instead of being consumed by doubt, I started using confusion as a sign, an invitation to explore the truth I was creating. That's when a transformation began to take place. For every moment I felt lost, I sought an anchor. Rather than succumbing to despair, I took a new path. I allowed myself to feel. The touch of the breeze on my face while walking through the city, the smell of fresh coffee, the laughter of the people around me. All of these became part of a new narrative I was building. And along this journey, I realized that true freedom didn't come from fighting against manipulation, but from redefining my relationship with it. It wasn't about silencing his voice, but rather amplifying my own. Every time I said no and saw his reaction, I reminded myself, confusion is a sign. And the more I affirmed who I was, the harder it became for him to continue distorting the truth. There was one day, months later, when he asked, perplexed, why I seemed so different. And the answer flowed out of me like an uninterrupted stream. I am rediscovering myself. I'm learning to listen to my own voice, and that scares you. His eyes narrowed, and instead of anger, I saw a flicker of fear. Not the fear I had felt, but the fear of losing control over me. This realization brought to light a deeper truth. I didn't need his approval. It wasn't necessary to fit into norms I never chose. And so, as I looked at that relationship, I chose to free myself from the invisible chains that bound me. If that space didn't allow me to be who I truly am, then it wasn't a safe space. And it was at that moment that I realized the strength that had always been inside me. The journey out of confusion and into clarity would not be simple, but the seeds had already been planted. With courage, I would begin to harvest the truth that had always been waiting to be discovered. And it was at that moment that I realized the strength that had always been inside me. The journey out of confusion and into clarity would not be simple, but the seeds had already been planted. However, as I started to gather these truths, something new began to unfold. I remember one afternoon when I decided to return to the park, that same place where I had lost myself so many times. The sun was shining brightly, but it was not just the light of day that illuminated my path. It was a deep feeling of rebirth. The flowers were blooming, and the air was filled with the sound of birds, as if nature was celebrating my new determination. I sat on a bench under a tree, feeling the texture of the wood beneath my hands. It was comforting, solid, and there, in that space, an epiphany struck me. Each shadow was a reminder of moments of doubt, of pain, but each ray of sunlight also carried the promise of new beginnings. What had once paralyzed me now felt just like another chapter in my story. A woman walked by me, talking to someone on the phone. Her voice radiated confidence and ease. Yes, I am who I am. If they don't like it, oh well. Hearing that echoed in my heart, a steady beat in sync with the rhythm of my own rediscovery. It wasn't just about freeing myself from his control. It was about embracing the authenticity that had always been waiting. As I observed the movement around me, I realized I wasn't the only one dealing with the remnants of manipulation. There were others around me, each fighting their own invisible battles, each carrying untold stories. This sparked a desire within me to share my experience, to show that confusion can be a sign, but it's also a call to action, a cry for truth and autonomy. With an uncontrollable urge, I began to write about it all, my experiences, fears, and triumphs. Each word became a tool, each sentence a key to unlock doors that had been closed for far too long. And so, by transforming pain into words, I realized that confusion wasn't a burden, but a source of power, an opportunity to connect with other souls who felt lost, perhaps just like I once did. When I finished, there was something deeper blossoming inside me, the idea that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but rather a form of strength. I then decided that I would share my story, not just for myself, but for all those who, at some point, felt diminished, doubtful, or invisible. Because in the end, the safe space I was seeking wasn't just for me, but also to create a sanctuary where others could find their voices. And in doing so, my own voice grew even stronger, a symphony of freedom resonating amidst the confusion, inviting everyone to join me on the journey of rediscovery.